thanks everybody for coming along again for our October event. We appreciate you taking the time out again, especially since we've got people here from all kinds of interesting hours of the day. And we've got, representatives from Canada, from the UK, from Australia, from all over the United States. And so this is always pretty exciting when we get such a great cross section of people, many of which have been speakers with us before. Some of you I know are new, and this might be the first or second time you've joined us. So we appreciate you coming along. And so let's get started. Just a few housekeeping elements to get started with. As I'm sure almost everybody over the last 18 months of pandemic, you are probably all experts in Zoom, but just in case, at the bottom there, you'll notice, a bunch of tools down there. Please feel free to use the chat. You can raise your hand, which I think is now in the updated version being in the reactions section, where you can just put a hand up or lob a question into the chat. In the meantime, if you're not speaking, it would be great if you could mute your microphones, just to keep the background noise as low as possible. I myself, now that it's 4:06, any moment I'm expecting the Amazon truck to show up and my border terrier to basically peel himself off the ceiling. So I'll try and kind of keep my own background noise to a minimum. I'll kind of moderate, so I'll make sure that all of you get your questions answered and get a chance to speak or get yourself called on if you raise your hand, because we want to make this as interactive as possible. Today we have a special guest that Barbara will introduce shortly that's going to talk a little bit about, she will talk a little bit about the connection between technology and genealogy. And so I think I'll turn it over to her to introduce our special guest and kick us off for the day.
Thank you, Cameron. Doing these Zoomin sessions, as many of you who first discovered us at Roots Tech when we first released the software, has been a journey, and we've learned along the way from all of you and discovered the real power of having you be our guests coming into this. And now, looking out months ahead, we can start to bring in and schedule some guests who bring value and interest to you. And I think that's especially the case here with Tami Mize. We've been very excited all month to have her join us. Tami is a very well-known face within the genealogical community for many things. Among them is a website she runs called Conference Keeper, conferencekeeper.org, which provides sanity to the complex nature of the different kinds of genealogy programs, genealogy society programs run around the world, right? And in presenting these, it's not only what the schedules are of who's doing what, but all of the other who's doing what, like all of the calls for papers and jamborees and other kinds of activities that happen within the genealogical societies around the world. In addition, she founded a site called Relatively Curious, which has some very interesting blog posts and other kinds of content related to this process of family history and genealogy. Met her, she found us along the way in this journey and has launched herself out into Ponga, and we realized immediately that she would have some interesting insights that all of you might benefit from as well. So we were delighted to invite her to be a speaker. I've had the privilege of several chats with her now in preparing for this, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you, Tami, as our speaker.
Thank you so much, Barbara and Cameron. I'm really excited to be here. I love any opportunity I have to talk about family history. And I warned Barbara that the problem with asking me to talk about family history in family stories is getting me to shut up. So I will do my best at controlling my excitement on this. I haven't always been this way. So 20 years ago is when I want to say got bit by the genealogy bug. Really, I just became very obsessed with genealogy at that time. And this is how. So when I was growing up, it was just my sister and myself. There were just the two girls. And my parents were basically Barbie and Ken. And my dad had no idea what to do with two girls who played Barbies and two we just did all the things that girls did. My mom dressed us up in ribbons and bows, and my dad hid out in the garage and tinkered, as dads tend to do. So I love my dad, but we just never had anything in common, never had anything that we could just sit and talk about or anything. And 20 years ago, he called me up one day and he said, I'm going to look into my family history. And the light bulb went off over my head. And I said, I can do that. That's something that I can do. And then we can have this thing in common. And boy, I had no idea what I was getting into. So first off, he started looking, and he was looking at names and dates and connecting his family tree. And he'd call me up and share this stuff with me. And I thought it was neat that he was building this tree, but I wanted to know more about these people. It's like they're just names, but who were they? If it was a grandparent, what were they like? If it was a great grandparent, they lived in this different place. I wanted to know the stories. So while he was digging into vital records, and he could prove when they were married, and he could prove when they died, I wanted to know, how did they die, and what what are the stories around it? So I would do a lot of research using Google Books and Happy Trust and archive.org, and came across these wonderful end of the 1800s genealogy books, when it was a big revival then and everybody wanted to write their story. So I was able to find all of these really wonderful stories. And at that time, I was still just, had my toe dabbling in it, but I thought this was really fun and really cool. And then I came across a story that changed everything for me. So the first story that I found that was, like I said, changed everything for me. It was my 5th great grandmother. So I was Googling around, and I Googled her name, and I came up with a book that had stories about her and her family. And what I learned about this woman that I'd never even heard of before was that she and her husband and 5 or 6 kids lived in Connecticut, and they decided that they were going to move west. And at that point, the far west was the Western Reserve, which then became Ohio. So they packed up all their kids in their wagon, and she went down to the cider mill and picked up a whole bunch of apple seeds, and everybody laughed at her, and they said, oh, you're never going to be able to grow apples out there. It's wild. It's insane. But she took the apple seeds with her, kind of a Janie apple seed, I guess. And they got to the wilds of the Western Reserve, and there's really no more than maybe 2 or 3 other families even living out there. There were a lot of Native Americans living there. The book had stories about how the Indians would come over, and the women would come in and visit and leave the little papooses leaning up against the house. And my grandmother, 5th great grandmother, as a child, they thought it was really fun to tip the papooses over and listen to them squeal. So these are stories that I never heard. But anyhow, so the one though that got me, she's got these apple seeds. She plants the orchard while they're busy working from scratch to make a living there. She's cultivating apples until she finally comes up with one that she really likes, and she named it after her husband, Jonathan. And that just sent chills through my body. I buy Jonathan apples at the store. This is my connection. This is somebody that was in my family, and this is a story I never knew. And I became completely obsessed with family stories. I was hooked. I wanted to know more. I wanted to know all my relatives. I wanted to know all of their stories. And I also realized that that it wasn't famous relatives. It really didn't matter to me if I was related to presidents or movie stars or even the King of England, which it actually turns out I am. But that's another story. But I wanted to know who these people were and what their lives were like, because they're just so different from what we're experiencing in our lives today. And family stories, they connect us and they inspire us, and they link our family generations. I'm sure that you know that. the more you know about any of your relatives, the more you feel a kinship to them. The more you see things being passed down. You see family, and you just start becoming, your view of the world gets smaller as you realize that you're really probably related to everybody that you're honking at when you're out driving somehow. So it's just always kind of fun. But they directly impact how we see ourselves too, because they give us a place to fit. We fit in the family. We aren't just another person who's going to have a life and have kids and go down and down and down. But we're part of this whole generational thing. We're part of this tree. We're part of this connected group of people. And I love this example that I read somewhere, and I thought it was so cool. If you consider your own life as a single thread is weak, a single thread is simple, it doesn't stand out from the crowd or anything else. But when you weave it into a tapestry, and the tapestry being our ancestry, the single thread becomes strong, and it's part of a bigger picture. We're not just this one person here. We are part of everything. We're part of this bigger picture. And I just love that, because to me, it gives me more of a sense of purpose in my life. It reminds me that I'm here for a reason. I'm here because all of these other people before me ended up having kids, and suddenly here I am. And with kids, though, they did a study. This was cool too. They did a study at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia in the 90s. And they found out that the more family history children knew, the stronger their sense of control over their own lives was, the higher their self-esteem, and the more successfully they believed their families functioned. So just knowing their family stories gave them a better sense of self. And the researchers noted this, and this is a quote: "Hearing these stories gave the children a sense of their history. Even if they were only 9, their identity stretched back 100 years, giving them connection, strength, and resilience." And I think, especially in these days where everybody's connected to their phone and not so much to other people, I think it's really awesome then for as a way for kids to feel more connected to family, feel more connected to other people. And these stories of perseverance and these stories of struggle of your ancestors. I mean, even as close as my parents, knowing the struggles that they went through, I learned from those, and I can pass those on to my kids, and they can learn from their ancestors, and they can learn from me as well. So in my beliefs, family history stories are super important. I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to actually sit down with my mom before she passed away. She had been telling us stories all her life, and I would listen and laugh and just kind of tuck it away. But I decided that I really needed to write all these down. So I'm so grateful for that, because as my dad was doing family history, like I said, he was finding the names and the dates and the records and that sort of thing. I realized when I started doing my mom's family side that that the information that I had, while it was factual and I could prove that these were my relatives, they didn't tell the story of these people. And I went back and in talking to my mom, so I have my this is where I brought in Ponga. I had been thinking, how can I tell these stories? I have a few pictures of my grandfather and of things like that. And I have all these stories from my mom. And so this is one of the ways that I've decided I want to use Ponga. And again, I'm fairly new at this, and every time I start working on one Ponga project, I get an idea to do another one. And I end up starting all sorts of different things. So I am going to share my screen, I think, if I can figure that one out. Let's see this one. Okay. And can you see that now? Can you see my screen?
You're still up with the family picture behind you.
All right, I have to hit share.
That's right. There you go.
There we go. Okay. So, Anna, I was curious where Anna might be from, because my mother's father came from Cheddar, England. And this was the house that he was born in. I had an aunt that went back to England and had taken some pictures and all, but this is, I just have this picture of this house, and I have these stories, like I said, that my mom put in. So I looked at this picture and I said, how can I bring this picture to life? And so using Ponga, I'm able to kind of combine the pictures, the stories that my mom told me. So like here, this is part of the village. I was able to link to a photograph of Cheddar, England around the early 1900s to see that this is what the town looked like that my grandfather was being raised in and grew up in. Cheddar's in the base of the Mendip Hills. And let me go back. And so here's another view of those Mendip Hills. And Mom told me that when my grandfather was young, he would go into these hills and he would pick wild mushrooms and wild blackberries and help sell them to help out the family. So by linking these things in my Ponga picture, I'm so excited. It's like, what else can I put in here? How can I tell these stories? Because to me, I'm not just looking at a picture of a house now. I can see its place. I can see where it's at. I've even down here put in a map. I put in the map and it goes to Google Maps so that I can show my kids just where. And based on the census records, going back to the facts, when he was 8 years old, he was living on a street called Water Street. Well, I couldn't find Water Street on here, but in the census, right after Water Street comes the Bays, and then Dag Hole, and then the Cliffs. So I am pretty sure that he was living right around here at the turn of the century. That's what part of the village he was living in. So I don't know. I just got very excited about being able to link all these things. So now more, I was able to put together of my, let's see, which one? This one. So my grandfather then, when he was 14, he and his older brother came to the United States, and I was thought, well, how can I show that in my Ponga? How can I, with just these few pictures that I have? So this is him. He was working, delivering milk. He would do whatever he needed to make money. He and his older brother, and he lived with these two people. They are Ernie and Lucy Long. My mom always called them aunt and uncle. They were no relation at all, but that's who he lived with. And I also linked in here a picture of the ship manifest that he sailed over on with his brother. And I've got the documents elsewhere so we can pull it up and see all that. But so he and his brother are over here in the United States, and his brother was super homesick and wanted to go back. And my grandfather, Reg, he didn't want to go back. So he worked really hard. He saved up all his money, and they made enough money in 2 years to bring over the entire family. So this was the entire family that they brought over. And that's my grandfather there. Anyhow, so I've been able to cobble together a little bit of his story. I've got more stories about him from my mom, and this is he and my grandmother, and like one of the only pictures I have of her. I was able to attach some more stories here to him. So and he wrote a book. This is kind of on the side. I had an uncle that offered to pay him $5 a page to write his story, write his history. And so this was many years ago. And so he wrote and he wrote. And there were things in that nobody had ever really heard before, and that also really helped with some very big family surprises that we came across. So, but he talked about when he was 18, a tree fell on his head, and they took a heaping teaspoon of slivers out of his brain, he said. So it was pretty amazing. So this is like in 1910 or so, and he lived another 70 years with a metal plate in his head, which I thought was pretty amazing. This was pretty cute. He also wrote this. I attached this one to his boutonniere here. This was his oh so romantic marriage proposal. He says, I got acquainted with Ethel Thompson and I went to see Ethel and I told her I wanted to marry her, so I'll give you a week to make up your mind. And on Wednesday evening, I went to see her and she said yes, so we got married. I always just get a laugh out of that. Pretty much straightforward, not so romantic. Then over here on my grandmother's boutonniere, I put a link to a picture of all of their kids, including my mom there and some of their husbands. But anyhow, so that's the family they raised. So this is one of the ways that I've been using Ponga to take these few pictures that I have and combine them with some of the stories that I already do have. So to me, it's really exciting to be able to do this. So let me see, what else can I tell you about this? Just the family stories, again, are so important. The things I got from my mother, one of the stories, like I had mentioned, even just hints or clues from family stories can really be a surprise and lead you back to information that you wouldn't otherwise know. So for example, when we were growing up, my mom and her brothers and sisters would all get together and they would talk and laugh like brothers and sisters do. And one of them would do something or say something and somebody would invariably say, oh, that's the royal blood in us. That's the royal blood in you. That's why, you know, and it was kind of a big joke amongst them. And my sister and I, of course, were like, oh, what does this mean? Are we princesses? What's the, what do you mean the royal blood? And mom and dad, or mom and her brothers just, oh, it's just some family rumor. There's probably nothing to it, right? So, so nobody had any, that was it. That was just this rumor of royal blood. And so when I started doing some research, I had my grandfather and I could see his birth certificate, death certificate. I knew where he was born. I knew who his parents were. So then I come to his dad and I have a birth certificate for his dad and it says who his mom and dad are. And so I'm thinking, that's that. There we are. He was born in 1861 in London and his parents were these people. Well, as I started to research, I realized that the people listed as his parents were pushing 60 years old. So I kind of wondered about that. And then I met a woman down in Australia who contacted me via genealogy sites and stuff and said, hey, you've got this fella and you're showing these people as his parents. She says, I think they're his grandparents. And I think that this sister is his mother. So we started digging into it and I did more research. I went and researched baptism books and everything else and she researched on her and come to find out his sister, who we had since determined was his mother, because she was the one that got him baptized when she was 14. She was a chambermaid in the palace. She lived right outside the gate. And it was during the reign of when Prince Edward Albert was running around philandering and driving his parents crazy trying to clean up after them. So we were pretty sure then, because when his birth certificate, his mother had never married and his name is William Albert. And so we are pretty thinking that he's one of those bastard children, but I'll never be able to claim my birthright. But anyhow, so that's what, just these little clues like that we were able to piece something together and it really was surprising. But back to family stories. So a lot of people think about stories in terms of somebody else's stories, or even, as I've said, like my mom's stories or my grandfather's stories. But like I said, somebody else's stories. Like your stories, every memory when you look at a picture, those are your stories. Every minute of your life, every sight that you've seen, every emotion that you've felt, everything anything that's brought you joy, those are stories that the people that come after you are going to want to know as well. And your memories are linked deeply in your brain. The stronger the memory, the stronger the connections are in your neurons. And all the sensations that form a memory, the sight, the sound, and like Karen Ray spoke about as well in last month, of the smells, how smells will evoke something. And right now, anytime I smell Ivory soap, I am transported to my grandmother's farmhouse kitchen. I don't even know where I'm at. I'm in that kitchen just from that smell. But photos are another great way to trigger memories. And I've ended up being, because I'm the genealogist in the family somehow now, and I ended up being the keeper of the photos. So I have bins and bins of all the family photos, and in going through them, I have to laugh. My mom would mark on the photos, on the front of the photos with a pen, who people were, which I guess is better than not knowing who they are. But on all of our school pictures, my name being Tami, on my collar, she would put a big T. So if I, in a group photo, she would know which one was me. And I tease my sister April about this all the time because she has a big A on her collar. But at least Mom didn't use scarlet for the labeling on the photos. But at least we're identified.
Hey, Tami.
Yes, sir.
With as much content and photographs and all of these rich stories, can you describe a little bit, like, how do you get started? Where did you decide to just kind of jump off into the, what was the photograph or the story that you wanted to develop, and how did you decide, among this incredibly deep lake of stuff that you have, where did you pick out the one thing to say, okay, this is my jumping off spot?
In terms of stories and photos and that sort of thing, like you said, there's this sea of photos. And so I wanted to start with my grandfather, because partly because it was easy, because I've got stories from my mom and I've got only a handful of photos. So it wasn't like I'd have to sort through bins and bins to get those photos. So and also just starting close at hand. When I look at the photos I have of my own parents, I have scads and scads of photos. So telling their story is going to be a lot more, I'm going to have to do a lot more sorting and choosing this photo and that photo. So for me, it was really easy to take somebody that I had known and that I did have a very limited number of photos to work with. So that wasn't going to be a huge part of the project.
Yeah. So it was already constrained a little bit by choosing a photo that was maybe one of a small group. Because I think everybody has a different way of thinking about this, and we all have a different, way that we're working through this. One of our guests today happens to be very focused on memorializing his family's, specifically his father's experiences as a Chinese American in World War II, and has a tremendous library of anecdotes and stories and research and photographs. And yet we have others that, may just have their, immediate family, and they decide to pick up a story that's an example of some specific area that they know something about. And it's always kind of an interesting element of color to figure out, what's that one thing that kicks it off and makes it go forward. For me, it was my mom, in as much as, we're trying to, she was just literally 3 days ago diagnosed with an Alzheimer's condition. And so we've been in a big rush for the last, year or so to get as much of the stories out of her head and into a place like Ponga with the relevant photographs, because we know we're running out of time. And so time was a big, function for that. So we really focused on her life more than other people's. And I guess everybody has some trigger that causes them to say, okay, this is where I'm jumping off. So.
Well, and it's with what I've found I would say playing with Ponga is that when I started doing this project with my grandfather and my grandfather's photos, and then I realized, okay, I'm going by this one set of memories, and my mom's brothers and sisters probably have a whole nother set of memories. And that, so I did this little experiment with my own kids in this past couple of weeks. And I sent them each 5 photographs. Now my kids are, my oldest just turned 40 and my youngest is 23. So there's kind of in the middle one somewhere around 34. I've actually forgotten how old she is. But there's this big disparity in their ages. So it was honestly rather difficult to find any photographs that had all 3 of them in at the same time that they would remember. But I found 5 photographs. I think I've got this here. So I pulled up these 5 photos, some different events that my kids had been, family gatherings at Christmas time. Because what I was curious about was just how disparate their memories of the same event were. And so like these aren't excellent quality photos. They're just family photos. So this daughter here remembered, we went to visit my husband's aunt in Philadelphia, and she remembered that.
Are you showing screen, Tami?
Oh yes, and shouldn't I be sharing that? Sorry.
That's okay.
Cameron. All right. So this was just we were all back visiting my husband's sister, and this daughter here remembered that, where's her memory? This daughter here remembered, I forgot why we were in Pennsylvania, but I remember that Auntie Sue cleaned her fans really well. But okay, whatever. All right, let's see. And then this one, she remembered that we had been over in Ohio previously to my mother's funeral, and then drove over to Pennsylvania to see her dad's family. And it was her first time playing the Wii, and she learned how to make fried pickles and all sorts of stuff. And what's odd to me is this one doesn't remember and doesn't comment on the fact that when we left this house, we drove her to an airport where she could get on she was the only student chosen on a science trip where they were taking ocean core samples going from Brazil to the Bahamas. And I thought, how do you not remember that as part of this trip? But she didn't. So that was pretty amazing. And then this one here, my son, who's hated the fact that I'm using this photograph of him, this really cracked me up. So among other things, he remembers that Christy, his oldest sister, and Uncle Dave were telling me about how toilets in the UK were actually waterless suction cups, and elaborated on how children would often get sucked in. But they never explained that they were joking, so I went on thinking they were real for at least a year.
Oh, that's great.
So, just in with my kids, seeing the different memories that they had. Now that's really inspired me to want to go back and focus on my family and my memories, because my memories of these events are even different than their memories of the events.
Right.
And so I think even for the kids to have a much fuller, and being of the age that they are, where they are very technology driven, this is the perfect vehicle to present to them, instead of saying, write me out what you remember or anything like that. They're not going to want to do that, but they're sitting at the computer anyway. They'll, oh, look, click on that. There's a picture. Let me add my comment to it. So I'm really excited using Ponga for modern memories, for not just putting together these ancestor stories.
Yeah.
But
it's really one of the things that I love about that story, Tami, is the way it sort of reminds us that our stories are the future past stories, right? And having those moments where you can look at those pictures, maybe all of us and our siblings' pictures of childhood, and how each of us have a very different memory, or as you have your children together remembering something completely different. When we chatted earlier, we talked about the classic Japanese samurai film, Rashomon, which is samurai all remembering a murder mystery differently. And that, of course, has been reproduced 100 different ways in 100 different other films since then. But that idea of everybody remembers something a little bit differently is really fun. I mean, my own brother and sister had names for houses that we lived in, and I've never understood what those meant because I sure didn't remember anything about that. And it was like the street they lived. I don't even neighborhoods. I don't know. We lived in a lot of different houses, so
Well, it's kind of a mental step to get when as a genealogist, where my focus is so much on the past, to include myself in that. It's
yeah,
I so often I remember I remember when I was little, my best friend, her family was from New England, and she had a dollhouse, and it was all set up like early colonial America, and she knew all the stories, and she knew how everything worked and everything else, and I was always so jealous, and I just thought, oh, that's so cool, she has this history. And I grew up knowing that my grandparents were dairy farmers in Ohio, and that's as far as anybody knew, that we were
yeah,
Ohio farmers. And I thought, oh, that's they're farmers, that's cool, but they're not these New England, early American things. So what's funny then is that over the course of my dad and I putting together our family trees and all, we've got several Mayflower ancestors, direct line. Our direct line ancestors were governors, religious leaders. They were probably the people that were governing all of her ancestors. And I thought, it's probably a good thing I didn't know all this, because I would have been insufferable. I would have been.
but that really reinforces your earlier point about giving kids that sense of resilience and confidence of their role right here, right now, because of those who came behind them and who will come after them, and how they will be that future memory and that kind of thing. The thought that a kid is sitting there jealous of another kid because that other kid has a history and they don't
Right.
is just breaks my heart, because of course you couldn't be here without a history. and
Right.
and and yet they feel that way. And
And that's
finding
why it's
pride and
so
confidence
important.
and resilience from the resilience of your parents, who may have had a hard scrabble life, or may have had a fall from some grace and then worked their way back, or whatever. You are here now, that's what we know. Yeah. So
And even
wonderful.
even if it's just the Barbie and Ken story, like I said, my parents were just Barbie. I just like Barbie and Ken. It was just uncanny. But and so we always thought that we had no stories. And now I look back, and life has changed so much from when I was growing up, that my stories are fascinating to my kids, and
Yeah.
I don't have really have them written down
Well,
anywhere. So
there's also a wonderful lesson in there, which is the power of finding something you have in common with someone else and using that as the thing to bring ahead. And, you look at your own family members, a parent who may have difficulty speaking, may have difficulty, pulling things together, giving them something to center on. I've just done that recently with my nephew and my mother, so that she struggles with cognitive issues, and being able to talk to her nephew, where he's asking her lots of questions and she actually can give very simple answers and be able to communicate about a shared past.
that's
And
nice. That's nice.
yeah,
Well, and so Thanksgiving's coming up, and what do people do at Thanksgiving? But I don't know about y'all, but we would sit around the table and talk and reminisce and that sort of thing. And all I'm thinking is, load up several family photos and get everybody, just because that with the record feature on Ponga, it's not even, you don't have to sit there and type something, just record their stories. And
yeah.
how fun to get, you know, And again, with kids, you can get their interest and connect them to all of this as well.
You know, in this crazy COVID world, not only do we do sessions like this over Zoom, but Ponga makes a really good tool to use for Zoom sessions because it's not like, I actually keep this one handy just for this purpose. It's not like saying, you remember this picture here? I mean, you barely saw that, right? And being able to bring up the screen and point to the details and record it. And even better, you made a recording of the whole session that then becomes an artifact that maybe you edit or maybe you don't, but now you can attach that to that picture and it carries it forward. That time that mom told us that story about the cameo.
And
Camaro.
how much more value to be able to have your mom on screen recording that story than like I have typed up notes because we were sitting at a table in Oklahoma. I was frantically trying just to get the information down. But
making the studio, the recording studio, go away is really important. You know, right here, it's all very awkward to see our own faces and everybody else's faces moving, but after a while, you get used to it and it disappears. And yet, you know, you've already worked out the logistics of being in front of a camera, but it can disappear. And I think that's really, really important. Or you catch these guys, catch a phone and stick it. Someone starts telling a story without any planning. You didn't see it coming. And you just go, voice memo, just record. Just shut up and record. Keep your mouth shut and record. And then you can take that audio file and attach it to the picture. And there's several different ways to do it. The simplest one is SoundCloud, free. Put your own thumbnail image to it. Simple as easy peasy. It's in my 12 kinds of content you can add to a Ponga picture blog post. Anything like that. If any of you have any questions about what could be done, toss it my way. We got this. Go ahead, name one.
Quiz me, go ahead.
Yeah.
I love that idea about recording from the phone because we do that with my dad because my dad's 97 and you never know when he's going to launch into some story that we haven't heard yet. You know, just when we think we've heard all of them, and he'll go off on something else. And my sister and I are both grabbing our phones trying to get the record button.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear you talk about it relative to the holiday period, because I think that that's a perfect metaphor for, in some cases, you know, when you and I first talked long, long ago, I was telling you my own personal origin story around Ponga and how spending, you know, time on farms with multiple generations telling stories, nobody ever collected that stuff. And so, you know, all of us spend all this time right now trying to recreate things that are from days gone by because we didn't have the tools or the technology or the presence of mind or whatever it was to do that. We now have that capability. And so it gives us a really great opportunity to memorialize those events almost in real time. And like over the Thanksgiving table or, you know, in and around family get-togethers during the holidays so that we can go almost immediately to the enjoyment and the kind of 360-degree adding points of view from all the different participants that are very probably different relative to how they think about the people and the stories and the associations that they have with that event. And now we can move right to the storytelling and the enjoyment and the sharing part rather than trying to reconnect all of that stuff and reconstitute all the memories and then get them in one place like we have a tendency to do with our parents, right? And that's kind of heavy lifting because there's a lot of photos, there's a lot of stories, there's a lot of relatives. And so it becomes this like big thing where, you know, if we think about that from an electronic medium going forward, it gives us the opportunity to move directly into that storytelling and sharing mode, right?
It reminds me that, you know, stories happen. You know, sometimes they're planned and scheduled, and appreciate your coming up with stories ahead of time for this conversation, Tami. But sometimes they just bubble up while you're driving or bumble up in the most unexpected places. And being able to treat stories as storytelling and not as performance is really special. And, you know, from our perspective, pictures, and by the way, objects can be triggers that encourage that moment to happen. And we're privileged to have built software around helping that moment be captured in the picture. You can also, you talked about holidays. I was thinking about Christmas ornaments. In my family, we used to have, bring new Christmas ornaments with every year. So they were from all over the world, they were from all over families, all sorts of stories associated with each Christmas ornament. Wow. You can take pictures of the Christmas ornament and then be telling stories about them and make that something that is shared, especially in these kind of now hybrid holidays, where maybe not everybody can even be present yet, but
Zoom holidays.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're learning new ways to do it, man. But I don't know about you, but at least it means in some cases that people that can never could get together in person in that place anyway before. And now we've got a new way to do it hybrid. So that's not bad.
Yeah. Outstanding.
Well, that's pretty much all I've got. I'm real excited. The more I play with, like it said, the more I play with Ponga, the more ways I find that I want to use it. And I keep a scratch pad, or I keep a notebook next to me about, oh, this is what I want to do next. But then I got to first finish this one and all that. So I'm the one with all the family photos. And so, but I'm so glad you'd asked me how I came up with where to start, because it did dawn on you just as you asked me. I did this because it was the easy way to start. And I think that's the way to go with it. Start with something easy. Don't take on your entire family history.
Yeah, it's something, like we said before, it's something you assemble as you go. And I think it's impossible to develop an intimate relationship with thousands of photographs. You've got to pick a few that are meaningful and go forward with them one at a time. We've got a couple of questions that have come in. Victoria, you were first there, so I'll grab you and have you go ahead and ask.
I'm laughing at Kathy because we both have our hands up.
Oh.
But I was first, and Kathy's very gracious. It's not really a question, Cameron. It's just a couple of things that Tami was talking about that first thing that maybe gets you on board going down that genealogy rabbit hole. And for me, it was a combination of an heirloom cameo that was given to me when my grandmother died back in the 70s. I thought it was hers until I was given a photograph about 20 years after that showed my great grandmother wearing the cameo. Now, in between 1970, whatever it was, and the 1990s, I wore that cameo on a black shoestring around my neck, right? And then as soon as I saw the photograph of great grandma wearing it, well, now am I cracking up a bit, Barbara?
You are.
Okay, I won't move. I'll stay still. You might see the cameo behind me in a shadow box.
Yes, right there. Yep.
I don't wear it anymore. So that was the jumping off point for me to follow down my great grandmother. And that's my family tree that I'm working on presently, is about her. The women followed her back to the UK, and it's a fascinating story. The other one that I'll touch on was I reconnected with a cousin of mine, the infamous Wendy, that I talk about a few times, because I posted a photo and distributed it with 20 of my cousins. And there was a photo of not biological uncle, married to my great aunt. And he's playing a violin. It's the early 1900s. I'm the only one that knew he played the violin because I had the photograph. So that started a conversation about that. Then it morphed into, oh, do you remember Auntie Pat gave us all $10 at Christmas time? Right? What did you do with your $10 at Christmas time? And my cousin Wendy and her 4 siblings didn't actually get the paper $10. Their parents put it all together and bought one thing. We got to go off to the store and buy candy with ours. We got our $10 note pinned to the tree. But that whole thing then morphed into Wendy and I having a conversation about my mother. And my mother used to, it was almost cousin envy. She used to talk about Wendy like she was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I thought, she likes Wendy more than she likes me. Right? So mothers have a way. But what came back from, and I told Wendy that, I said, I think your mother loved you more than my mother loved you more than she loved me. And she said, oh no, she says, your mother was the most beautiful person. And she went on this wonderful story about my mother. The key thing here about this story about my mother, the money on the tree, Christmas, is that I hadn't spoken to Wendy for 40 years before I shared that photograph with Ponga.
Yeah, that's
so it's
cool
it's
story.
very powerful stuff. Yeah, it's really, really powerful stuff. And we chuckled about it. And now Wendy is kind of my go-to family member when I'm doing something with Ponga. What do you think? Is this working? And she is right on it. So it can be a little photograph you think is about one thing, and it morphs into another story that you didn't even see it coming.
That's
my story.
That's a great story, Victoria.
That's my story.
Yeah.
You're up next, Kathy.
Off you go, Kath.
Thanks, Victoria and Cameron. I actually have a question for Tami. I'm curious to know, you're a genealogist. When you first started doing genealogy, did you take courses? Like, how did you figure out, or did you just figure it out on your own? How did you get started in that area? Because I'm just sort of starting. I have a lot of family research that was done by a relative that I'm inheriting, along with box loads of pictures, but I'm a photo organizer. I'm not a genealogist. I can help you get the photos in order, but that's really where I don't know where to start.
The stars all lined up in perfect harmony when I decided that I needed to do my family history. The National Genealogical Society was having their annual conference. I was living in Austin at the time, and they were like 2 months later, they were having their National Society conference there in Austin. And somebody said, well, hey, you should go to that. And so I did. And I learned so much. And I learned more than anything, I learned what I needed to learn. I mean, I learned the things that I needed to learn more of. I learned what I didn't know. I learned what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do. And so a conference to me is a total smorgasbord of learning. So, and now so many places are doing them online. And so you can still reap all those benefits of all of those different types of classes and do it online instead of having to travel so much. But that would be my, if you wanted to dive into it, a conference. But even there's so many webinars, there's several, and running Conference Keeper, believe me, I know how many webinars are out there. Conference Keeper is a online genealogy event calendar, and I put in things from societies and from private companies and from speakers, but just anything of interest to genealogists. And there's always, I've always got between 600 and 1,000 events on the calendar. And there's always events for beginners. There's always, how do I start my genealogy? And then there's everything you want to know about DNA, or there's way more advanced ones for people who, I mean, there's titles of talks that I look at and I go, I have no idea what they're talking about. So I would highly recommend webinars as well, because you could find anything that you think you want to learn in a webinar.
Yeah, I put a couple of links in the very beginning of the chat thread, and anybody that wants to go there, I can tell you it is almost an overwhelming. I mean, Conference Keeper must be the kind of location of record for all things genealogy that are going on in any given month, because I can tell you that there's hundreds of events in that thing, and they're a broad cross section of educational events, free webinars, regional genealogical associations, professional associations. There's just a really wide variety of things there that's got probably a little bit of something for everyone.
There's one of the things too that I just have been building up is that there's a page that lists genealogy podcasts. So if you like to listen to podcasts, I've got a page with now I think about 20 or 25 different genealogy podcasts that you can choose from. And these are, I'm not associated with any of the events or any of the podcasts or anything. I just created this website because it's the resource that I wanted. I wanted to know where the calls for papers were. I got tired of looking all over the web for everything, and so it just decided to put it all in one spot. And I have benefited so much from the service and generosity of other genealogists that I felt like this was something I could do to give back. So this is my service project for genealogy. It's completely free to use for everybody to use it or to submit. Do free publicity, anything. So
yeah, it's a great service, Tammy, for sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy, for that question. Anna, you're up.
Yeah, this is an extra answer to Kathy about starting in genealogy. So remember to take notes and keep sources, and keep the sources so you can find your way back. And thank your lucky star if you find roots in Sweden, because you will have way more material to look in than anywhere else. And contact me. I'll help you.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for that. Thanks, Anna, for that. That's a great tip. It sounds like.
Yeah, and Tami, I live about an hour's drive away from Shadow.
Oh, neat. The family came there from Bath Easton, so they had been.
Yeah, I live just up the hill from Bath Easton in Cologne.
Oh, how cool! Maybe I'll come visit you someday.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe your family somehow know each other.
Stranger things have happened.
It's Scandinavian, so.
Yeah, I mean, you never know, right? Well, listen, everybody, we're at the top of the hour, and I appreciate everybody's attendance. I want to especially thank Tami for coming along and being our speaker this month. Really great stuff that you're doing with Ponga. Very excited to be associated with you and Conference Keeper and all of the activities that you're doing. And thanks so much for kind of walking everybody through your thinking and how you're using Ponga. Appreciate that very much. So thanks again. So we're going to close up today with the same kind of instructions as before. We're going to send out an email. You'll get a link to the recording in case you missed some of it. I know we had a couple of latecomers. Patricia, I know that you weren't here from the beginning. And so if you and possibly Pat or one of the others that came on a little bit later, maybe you can go back and look at the full recording. And if you have any questions, you can always get in touch with us. I also want to remind everybody, check in our social channels, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And we're always, again, willing to offer. And I guess we've made this offer several times. I can certainly direct this specific author to some of our newcomers that we're happy to do personal one-on-ones for you, your families. We do Zoomin pods for small groups. And we'd be happy to kind of get your family onboarded and up and running so you can be productive with Ponga almost immediately. It's a very, I think you saw with the demonstration that Tami gave, it's a very easy to use product, and but it's also a very deep, functionally rich product. So if you get lost in some of the functionality, please feel free to give us a call or go to our chat support. And our extensive support staff can respond to your requests. So our next event is going to be Monday, November 15th at 4 p.m. By the way, does this time frame work for everybody? Because I know Victoria is great about getting up at the crack of dawn or whenever she does to get these things, and Anna attends in the middle of the bloody night from the UK. And we've got people in all kinds of time zones. Is this a good time for everybody? It is. Okay, I see a lot of head shaking. So we'll continue to run with this kind of time frame. So mark your calendars for Monday the 15th at 4 p.m. You'll be getting obviously an email, and we'll announce the special guest for that outing shortly. Barbara, any parting comments?
No, I think you've pretty much covered it. Just to underscore, no, some of you are quite new to all of this and may not have made a lot of sense. The offer of a one-on-one tour is very sincere. I know many of you from the one-on-one tours that I've done with you, and quite frankly, it's a wonderful opportunity for us to get to know you, and we use this to really understand our customers as a whole. So you're doing us a favor as well. Don't, and it's delight. Many of you, I know I may have even initially met you online, and it's a pleasure to always make these personal connections and carry it forward. These have become a conversation. It's a monthly check-in. It's such a delight.
Yeah, this is going to sound like a crazy thing to say, but we actually mean this, and that is that, you know, we would like to have, you know, hundreds of committed users instead of thousands of just people that bought a subscription and don't do anything with it. And so we get asked all the time, gosh, aren't we bothering you guys? Do you really have time to do this for myself or my family or a small group or whatever? The question is absolutely yes. We'll spend whatever time you need to get you up and running and functional and facile with the product, so you're effectively using it for purposes that make sense to you. Okay, so just understand that. Feel free to reach out. We're always here for you. With that, everybody have a great weekend, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.